So today we have Sarah Everhart. She's going to be speaking on operating a women-owned business. Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and open
in the chat box as we go along, and if I think your question requires some research or a longer answer, I will provide my email at the end, so it might be best for us to just email and so I can give you a more thorough answer. But I work for the Agriculture Law Education Initiative, and it's a collaborative program between the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, the University of Maryland College Park, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. We are an Empower program, and that means, just like I previously explained, we bring together the different parts of the University of Maryland to make the best possible product for all of you. Our job is to educate farmers throughout the state on a variety of different issues. So here's our website. If you haven't checked it out before, I recommend you check it out. We just revamped it, so if you've previously checked it out but haven't been there in a while, it might look a little different, and hopefully it's improved for you. But we have a variety of different legal resources there for you. Under the Publications Library tab, there's a whole host of different legal publications. We have links under the Legal Resources tab, videos, and then we have a quarterly update that you can also sign up for so that you get an email once a quarter and you can hear about what events we have coming up and what new resources we have. And this is just a slide explaining exactly where that quarterly update sign up is. We also write for a blog, the Maryland Risk Management Education blog, and it's co-sponsored with the Maryland Crop Insurance Program. We try to update it a couple times a week, and it's a great place to find answers to agricultural law questions and to keep up to date with current legal events and cases. And if you'd prefer to just call me on the phone, this is our legal info line. It actually rings directly to my cell phone, so I will be the one on the other end of that line, and I'm happy to try to help you as much as I can. We can't serve as your individual attorney. However, I can do research for you. I can try to find answers for you, and if it gets to the point where you need a personal attorney, I'm happy to make a referral for you. Okay, just a little disclaimer before we get going today. This presentation is just for educational purposes. It's not individual advice. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, and for how these issues may affect you personally, you should consult your own personal attorney. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about different types of business entities and what they can do for you, and then towards the end we're also going to touch on women-owned businesses, and specifically some benefits to having a woman-owned business in agriculture. So let's start off with generally what business entities can do. They can do quite a few different things. Sometimes folks think of them in certain contexts, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some illustrations of all the different things they can do for you. One of the most important things they can do for you is that they can limit your personal liability by separating your personal assets from your business assets. They also are a good way to allow for multi-person ownership structures. So this is a popular reason in the ag context for people to establish a business entity if you have various family members who all have an ownership interest. They can allow for investors. They can allow for easier transition and estate planning, and I'll give you some illustrations of how that works as we go along today. With each type of business entity, there's pros and there's cons, and like I said before, your best bet is to consult your attorney about the legal implications and then to talk to your accountant about the tax implications, because each one of these has their own unique tax implications also. So let's talk about the different types of entities. The first type of entity is a sole proprietorship. A lot of folks don't think of this necessarily as a type of business entity, but if you just own a business, you own a farm, that's actually a type of business entity. It's considered a sole proprietorship. The advantages of a sole proprietorship is that there's no filing required. You have full control over the assets and you can buy and sell freely. You don't need to worry about segregating assets. There isn't any separate tax. However, there's quite a few disadvantages. There's no personal liability protection. So if you own a farm and someone gets hurt on your farm and sues you, your assets, your personal assets include the farm. So there's no separation there. They could come after your personal home if your home isn't located on the farm as well as the farm. There's no transitional or estate planning benefits. And there's no income tax planning benefit since there's no separate tax treatment. And the investment in the business is really limited to what you can personally borrow. Is a sole proprietorship right for me? Sole proprietorship is unfortunately still the vast majority of farms, both in the Mid-Atlantic region and nationwide, are still owned as sole proprietorships. Is it right for you? Perhaps, I say tentatively, it may be good for an individual farmer just starting out. And the reason I say that is because there's no legal fees to set up, no maintenance. However, there is many downsides, and even if you're a farmer just starting out, I would recommend considering a business entity and at least talking to your attorney about it, because there is absolutely no protection from liability, and there's no way for you to plan for the future or to have anyone else incorporated in your business. We try to encourage folks to take that step away from sole proprietorships. In many instances, farms are passed down and maybe grandpa and dad never worried about it, and the farm's always been how it's been, and it's always been owned as a sole proprietorship. But unfortunately, we live in a very litigious society, and if you make changes in the operation, such as starting an agritourism operation, or you pick, or something similar, and you're inviting the public onto your farm, you really need to think about limiting your personal liability. All right, so let's talk about a different form. We'll start off with the least complicated and get a little bit more complicated as we go along. General partnerships. General partnerships, what they are, it's basically just two people being in business together. The advantage is that a filing is not required. However, I do strongly recommend one. Even if you are just in business with a spouse or just in business with a sibling or with a friend, that's a general partnership, and there's legal rights and responsibilities there. So it's really best to have your understanding written up and have a partnership agreement. It doesn't have to be complex, but it is recommended. Both partners have an equal right to manage, absent an agreement to the contrary, in a general partnership. This could be good or bad. I put it under advantages. However, you have to think about it's not always, you may not always want to have an equal right to manage. That might not actually be your understanding that both people have an equal right. An advantage is that it's easy to dissolve, and that partners are taxed on profits. The entity is not taxed. So partnerships are what they call a pass-through entity, and that basically means the profits pass through to the partners themselves, and there's not a separate entity tax. Disadvantages to the general partnership. Partners are jointly and severally liable for all the debts of the partnership. This is a big negative. This means that your partner can get you into debt, and that you would be totally liable for the debts of the partnership. So you could get each other into financial trouble, which is a big downside, and something that could be mitigated in a partnership agreement. Profits and losses are shared equally unless the agreement says something to the contrary. And the partnership is dissolved upon the death or withdrawal of a partner. That's a disadvantage of a partnership. Things may be working fine, but if there's an unexpected death, or if one partner decides he wants out, the partnership needs to be dissolved, and then the one partner may be left holding the bag. So that's a very important part about having a partnership agreement, is what happens upon the withdrawal or the death of one of the partners. And that's where we see a lot of problems come into play when folks are jointly running a business as a general partnership and they don't have an agreement in writing, because you got to think about, you will end up having to deal with wrapping up the business with your partner's personal representative, heirs, that type of thing. Is a general partnership right for me? Perhaps. A general partnership may be good for a married couple or siblings who inherit equal interest in an operation and want to share in management responsibilities. The downsides are that the decisions have to be made jointly, and so gridlock can occur. I really equate a general partnership to a marriage. Sometimes marriages work great and people are able to make joint decisions, and sometimes they're not, and gridlock can occur. And you don't have a lot of liquidity to, or flexibility rather is the right word, to sell interest to raise money. And the no personal liability protection is really the biggest downside for the general partnership. So you need to think about that and keep it in mind if this is something you're considering. All right, let's talk about a limited partnership. This is starting to get a little bit more complex. A limited partnership is a partnership where you have two different types of partners. You have a general partner and a limited partner. This is often what folks think about or commonly referred to as like the silent partner. So there's advantages to this. It allows for investors. A lot of times limited partnerships are set up in a situation where you have someone like a silent partner who really just wants to be financially involved in the company. And then you have the general partner who has the management authority and bears the risk. The limited partner has liability protection to the extent of his investment. So he's really only involved, he could really only, his liability is limited to the extent of his investment. However, he has to stay in his lane. And by that I mean the limited partner has to actually act like a limited partner in order to take advantage of that liability protection. So you can't have a limited partner who's making management decisions and acting in every way just like a general partner and then tries to hide behind that reduced liability. The court in most cases won't buy that. So if you set up a limited partnership, you have to actually operate it in that way in order to take advantage of that. Profits and losses are allocated based on your contributions, and it's taxed just like a general partnership, meaning it's a flow-through entity. Some of the downsides, a filing is typically required, so this is starting to get a little bit more complex, so you're going to have to file with your state. You're definitely going to have a partnership agreement. The limited partner is not going to have management authority, which may or may not be a downside. These are good, they can be good in estate and transitional planning. Some states also have family limited partnerships, so that might be something you could look into depending on your jurisdiction. Is a limited partnership good for me? Maybe. It might be good for you if your operation involves farming and non-farming partners. For example, the farming partner could be the general partner. They could have the management authority and bear the risk, and then the non-farming partner could be the limited silent partner. So if you have siblings that inherit a property, one lives in the big city, one lives on the farm, you could set things up this way and it would sort of naturally fit your situation. Family members who own different percentages of ownership, this could also be good for them. I can see it in the parent-child context. Parent could be the general partner and allow for the child to be the limited partner, or vice versa. If you had an aging parent who still wanted to be involved but didn't want to actually be out there day to day, or maybe couldn't physically be out there day to day, you could have the child be the general partner and the parent could still be involved as a limited partner. Okay, let's talk about corporations. This is probably the most common type of business entity that people think about. There's some advantages. One of the advantages is that the stock is transferable, so you can transfer stock during operation without disrupting anything. You can create classes of stock, and that can help with transitional planning. Shareholders have limited liability for corporate debt, which is good. And the only time this is not the case is if the corporate veil is pierced. That's a fairly rare occurrence, and typically only happens in cases where bad faith is shown. Disadvantages to a corporation, they are fairly burdensome to establish and maintain. So you're going to have to file articles of incorporation, you're going to have to keep corporate bylaws, you're going to have board of directors meetings, keep minutes. There's a lot of record keeping requirements. And shareholders only have basic voting rights. Really, the board of directors in a corporation is going to be the one making the decision. Profits and corporate dividends are taxed unless you choose to establish an S Corp, which an S Corp is a corporation, but it's taxed like a partnership, so the profits flow through. I have seen these prove to be too complex in some ag situations. If you're a family farm, this might be just too much paperwork and record keeping for you unless you have somebody in your family or in your operation that's particularly good at that type of thing. They can be hard to run and maintain if you have folks outside of the state that you're in. If you need to get people physically in a room for board of directors meetings, and that's not going to happen because you have folks in various states, they can be difficult to manage. Is a corporation good for you? Maybe. If you have a large operation, it would allow you to bring younger family members into the operation slowly. The owner could maintain management control and issue shares of non-voting or non-majority stock to slowly transition ownership. The downside really is just what I was talking about. They're very rigid and they can be difficult to operate. So what's the solution to that? Well, the solution to that is, this is sort of the current darling of the business entity group, and that's the limited liability company. A limited liability company is a combination of a corporation and a partnership. They basically tried, the limited liability company has the advantages of both. So they're more flexible than corporations. Contributions can be made in any form. There's no limit to the number of members. Individuals, entities, trusts, and corporations themselves can all be members of the LLC. So if you already have some business entity planning in your operation, say you have a trust that owns the property or another entity that is an operating entity, you can actually make all of those different entities members of an LLC. Members all have personal liability protection, which is a big advantage. Members have management authority based on their contribution, or they can elect to have a managing member do the management. The big advantage to the LLC is it's a very flexible type of business entity, and most states basically allow you to dictate a lot of the terms of how these are operated in your operating agreement. So it's very important that you have a good operating agreement in place if you form an LLC. Tax like a partnership, so the profits and losses are passed to the members. Disadvantages to the LLC, there's not really too many, to be honest with you. You do have to file articles of incorporation, and you are going to have an operating agreement, like I said. That operating agreement should really be customized to you and your operation. The terms of that operating agreement are going to answer all the questions in your LLC. So spend some time with your attorney and tell them exactly what you're trying to achieve by forming this LLC. I have a question in the chat box. If you have no partners in your business, is an LLC still a good choice? Yes, I think so. You can form a single member LLC, and then you would still have the liability protection. So yes, I have done that for people, and I think it is still a good choice because it still gives you liability protection. You're still separating your personal and your business assets. Disadvantages for the LLC, I was really kind of having to scrape the bottom of the barrel here, so to speak. So I said that it's not easy to transfer interest because members must approve. I mean, that's true to a certain extent. A membership interest in an LLC isn't always the easiest thing to transfer, but Really, in total, not a lot of downsides for the LLC. Good for anyone who needs to combine various forms of ownership entities. And here's my example. Family limited partnership owns the farmland. You and your daughter want to start an agritourism operation. The family limited partnership and you and your daughter can all be members of the LLC, sharing profits with limited liability. All right, so before I move on, does anybody have any other questions about business entities? If you do, feel free to put them in the chat box. We have some publications on our website that go into a little bit more detail and offer some more specifics on some of the Maryland choices. And I'm happy to help anybody who wants to email me afterwards as well. Okay, women-owned businesses. Let's talk about that. According to a 2006 American Express State of Women-Owned Businesses report, women own 30% of all businesses nationally, starting more than 1,000 new businesses a day and at a rate of 5 times the national average. Women-owned businesses are also pumping up the U.S. economy, generating more than $1.6 trillion in revenue and employing close to 9 million people nationwide. So, we're busy, not a big surprise to most women. We're all hardworking, busy people, and women-owned businesses are on the rise, and this is great. But what exactly is a woman-owned business, and why do we care? So let's go through this a little bit. Shannon asked me to touch on this, and I think it's a good point. You hear sort of colloquially that there's, some advantages to being a woman-owned business, and so I'll try to explain a few of those now, and maybe a little bit of the misconceptions there. There are goals in place to ensure that small businesses get their fair share of work with the federal government. So each federal agency must set an annual goal for participation in its contracts by various groups. And there's a federal government-wide 5% contracting goal for small women-owned businesses. So one reason why we care about women-owned businesses is because of this federal contracting preference, so to speak. The federal government has a goal that they need to try to procure 5% of all of their purchases from small women-owned businesses. So what is a woman-owned small business? Pursuant to federal law, a woman-owned small business must be at least 51% unconditionally and directly owned by women who are U.S. citizens. Women must manage the day-to-day operations, must make the long-term decisions, must hold the highest officer position, and must work at the business full-time during normal working hours. So that's the general definition for the gender part of it, and then the business must be small in its primary industry in accordance with SBA size standards for that industry. So depending on your industry, you can look under the Small Business Administration standards and figure out if your business meets the small criteria. There's also a separate designation for economically disadvantaged women-owned businesses. So I provided the link to you there in case you think you might qualify for that. And then I also provide the link below to how to register as a woman-owned small business. So if you don't do any government contracting, let's talk about why it would benefit you to set up your business as a woman-owned business. Well, one of the big advantages in agriculture comes in play with the Farm Service Agency. They set aside a portion of their loan funding to socially disadvantaged farmers. I don't like this term, socially disadvantaged farmers. It makes me feel like they think, women and these minorities have trouble talking at parties. But anyway, that's not what it means. So I joke and digress. So the socially disadvantaged farmers are women, African Americans, Alaskan Natives, American Indians, Hispanics, Asians, and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. The confusing part, and where I think folks get a little bit confused with FSA, is that these are not actually specific loan programs or loan types. To be considered for targeted funding, loan applicants must voluntarily provide their race, ethnicity, gender information. So when you apply for a general FSA loan, if you provide your race, ethnicity, and gender, you qualify for targeted funding in those general loan categories. So the question often comes into play, what about if a brother and sister own a farm? Or what about if a husband and wife own a farm? Are they considered women-owned? If a woman is a part of the business, when is it a woman-owned business? How would they qualify under FSA for that targeted funding? The sister would be eligible as a socially disadvantaged applicant if she owns a majority share or a 51% membership interest in the LLC. So I just used LLC as an example. It would really be if it was owned by an entity, any entity, and then if it was just sister and brother, if she owned a 51% share, a larger share. So in my example, if the LLCs own 50-50, then the LLC would not be considered a targeted, underserved, socially disadvantaged applicant, since the majority of the interest is not actually owned by the sister. So it's something to think about if you're considering establishing a business entity and you're a woman, and maybe you're, the other person involved in the business or the other people involved with the business are men, and you're going to be going for FSA loan funding. It may be something to consider to give yourself the 51% interest. I mean, a 51% interest is usually good anyway, because it means you can call the shots and you own the majority. But this is another good justification for setting up your business that way. I see a question in the box about how many acres do you have to be considered a farm. I'm going to refer you to these two links here for more about FSA lending, because I don't know that answer off the top of my head. Here's a fact sheet specifically about socially disadvantaged applicants, and then there was also a good Women in Ag webinar back in January on FSA loan programs that you could check out that recording and probably find the answer to your question. So like I think I tried to explain this, I'm not sure if I did, so I'll go over it one more time. The advantage comes into play if the state's allocated FSA lending funds are running short. So every state gets an allocated pot of funds. So if your state is nowhere close to running out of FSA funding, it might not necessarily matter that you applied as a socially disadvantaged applicant. However, if your state's allocated lending funds are running short, and you apply as a socially disadvantaged applicant, you could receive loan funding when someone who didn't have that designation may not. So given our current situation with cutbacks and the like, it may become very important. Interestingly, NRCS does not consider gender alone enough to qualify you as a socially disadvantaged applicant for NRCS programs. So you really have to look at these program by program, and don't assume that just because you're a woman you're going to have an advantage. It really depends on the specific programs. Okay, so in summary, business entities, look for ways to limit your personal liability no matter the size of your operation. If you're one person and you own a farm, it's worth thinking about setting up a business entity to limit your liability. It can also provide you with some important tax benefits, and it can really importantly make it easier for you to grow your business, allow you to have silent partners, investors, and allow you to plan for the future. And finally, organizing your business as a women-owned business can provide advantages in applying for government contracts and for borrowing. So that might be an important thing for you to consider. I have a question in the chat box. Can an agritourism operation be established as a 501c3 versus an LLC? a 501c3 has certain characteristics, and typically if you're a for-profit agritourism operation, it may be difficult for you to meet some of the requirements that you're providing educational type services. So I would look at that, the requirements of the 501c3. For an LLC can be any type of business. So you wouldn't have any, for agritourism, an LLC would be a great choice. A 501c3 may be more difficult for you to qualify if you're in a typical for-profit type operation. You don't have a greater educational type purpose like other nonprofits would have. Okay. Well, if anyone has any more questions, there's my phone number and there's my email, and I'm happy to talk to anyone who would like to give me a shout. Thank you.